Hi, everybody. Welcome to Applied Technologies CrewWare Live. We're going to spend a bit of time taking you through CrewWare, setup, operation, and some deep detail. A couple of things. First, I'd like to introduce Art Gonzalez, who is on my right. I don't know if he's on your right, and Mark Repas on my left. And the three of us together are the client sales team, and we will all be showing you a piece of the puzzle today. A couple of things for housekeeping. First, if you would like to and you haven't had a chance, you can go to appliedtechnologies.com and downloads, and you can download CrewWare. It'll take you through everything except the live portions that we have and the belt packs, but you can play along at home. And the other housekeeping thing is that in your control panel, you do have the ability to ask us questions live. And please ask away. We know that everybody's got a different spin on how they need to use the system. So as you ask the questions, we will do our best to either answer them live, or we may wait a little bit if we're going to be covering that in a section that's coming up. But feel free to ask as many questions as you like. And I think I see a few people from our international group, so thank you for joining us in a late time zone. And I'm going to hand it off to Art for a moment to take a poll.
Yeah, we're just going to start out and kind of get an idea of who's online for the webinar. So I'm going to launch just a short poll. Make sure you select one answer from the poll, and then we'll show you the results of the poll. This first poll is, what organization application are you most involved with or interested in? So you can select theater broadcast, live event corporate, house of worship, rental house, or if you're a dealer or a rep. So we'll give a few seconds here for everybody to answer the poll, and then we'll move on from there. All right, give about another 5 seconds or so, and then we will close the poll and we'll see what the results are. All right, so here we go. Going to close the poll, and then I will share the results of the poll. So as you can see here, looks like the largest segment we have is theater broadcast and house of worship, and glad to see a lot of our dealers and reps online as well. So we appreciate you doing that, and we'll switch back to the presentation. And then we'll hand it back off to Gary, and he'll give you a brief overview of the hardware before we jump into the software portion of it.
Great. So for those of you who don't have a system in front of you or haven't had a chance to actually physically work with the hardware, I just want to do a quick review of the different components that we have as part of the system. So this is a control unit. We actually have two models. You see on the right-hand side, it says 2+2 and 4+4. And that represents the amount of I/O available on each. The front panels are identical and operations identical. It's just one has two 2-wire and two 4-wire, and one has 4 of each. Okay, let's go to the next slide. There we go. Okay, these are our two hubs, and what you see on the top is our copper hub. And the copper hub uses Cat5 standard wiring, but it's again not IP based, so you can't use a traditional switch. And it does have 8 copper, and number 8 is actually copper or fiber. And we can come in or out in any direction. You could come in copper, go out fiber. You could come in fiber, go out copper. So pretty versatile. You'll also see on the left-hand side is a local power for 48-volt DC supply. And this device can be powered directly from the control unit over power over CrewWare, or you can locally power it, which you would need to do if you were using the fiber as an input, because you wouldn't be able to pick up the power over the network. Below that is the fiber hub. It's a very similar operation, except we reverse the connections. It has 1 copper and 8 fiber. And we'll show you a little bit later in some of the applications how some of these are being used. Let's go over to the next slide. And our transceiver. These are available in 2 frequencies. I'm going to be showing you both. They look identical, they operate identical, but they are two different devices. One's at 900, one's at 2.4. And you'll see the front panel below. We have some indicator lights on it. We have fiber or copper input. There's also a loop through output that allows you to put multiple devices in a daisy chain. This can be powered off of the network, or it can be powered individually with the port on the right-hand side. And I think, there we go. Here's our radio packs. We are the only company that offers two different radio packs for you. They're available in both frequencies. Again, they are identical with the exception of the number of individual conferences or PLs that you can listen to at the same time. One's a 2 volume and one's a 4 volume. Mark will be getting into that a little bit later, how to configure that. Okay, and okay. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to take you through CrewWare, and what we've designed is a non-existent show, and we're going to use that. There we go. And okay, so you should at this point see my screen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by I'm going to close what I have right now and start with a blank screen. Okay. So what we have here in the layout is going across the top. You've got your pretty traditional file tools and just a little convenience buttons here. We have our grid where we're going to make our system configuration, and we'll go into the toolbox in a minute. And then we have device management, conferences, and profiles that Mark will explain with groups, and event log, and also firmware. So we'll take you through all of those. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a small, very basic system just to show you how simple it is to do. So I'm going to click on the device toolbox at the bottom, and I'm going to go ahead and select a control unit. In this case, I'm going to make it a 4.4 control unit. I'm just going to drag it onto the screen. So that's a fairly standard configuration, you know, of a CAD system that you've seen. I'm going to also take a copper hub, and I'm going to put that in the system, and I can drop it any place on the grid I'd like. And I will take a 900 and a 2.4 transceiver, and I'll take a second 900. We'll make a little bit bigger system. And I can choose to go from the control unit into the copper hub, and I can then go from the copper hub to the first connector on the transceiver. And that's all there is to connecting it. I don't have to use a hub. I can go directly from the control unit from either port. The control unit has a copper only or a fiber only. And I can take it and go directly to the device. And if I right click on it and I can change it, the color, and now you can see that this is a fiber connection, this is a copper connection. And I can choose to either connect this last one directly, or I can just do a daisy chain and come out of one into the next. So you can see it's fairly straightforward. That's how we build up a configuration. Once that's built and we save that file, all you really need to do is plug into the ports that you wish, right? So I'm into port 3 here, and the system will wake up and says, oh, yes, I'm on port 3. I'm expecting to see one 2.4 transceiver, one 900 transceiver. Everybody's happy. So that's a basic configuration. The next thing I'd like to do is take you into the actual interface to be able to control these guys. So once I mouse over, you'll notice that a lot of information comes up. Everything from device addresses to status to firmware version. Now, because we're not live, it's not actually connected to anything. These guys won't fully populate, but once I go live on the system, we'll show you how that works again. So for each device, when we mouse over, we get the individual information. So the first thing I want to do is I want to configure my control unit. So I'm going to just double click it, and up comes the interface. I'm just going to minimize that guy a little bit. And up comes the interface for the control unit. And you can see here's our back panel. It's a 4.4. And at the top, I can go ahead and I can create a name, an individual name. So we can call this, let's say, we can call it stage. And you'll see that there are actually two fields, long and short name. And that's because on the packs, we've got an 8-character limitation. So we allow you to go ahead and give it a short name and a long name for use here. We have a list view, and this would be handy, as Mark will show you in a little bit, if you have more than one control unit in the system to be able to get to. And so this is actually just a passive the display of what it is. Sync priority is, again, when you're using multiple control units, it's going to tell you who's the master in the system. The master will control the other control units. We have the front panel LCD, your IP addressing that we can set. And you notice here, we can also set up all of the firmware, read all of the firmware, the device ID. And again, when we go live, I'll go back in here and let you see that. This next section is for the local headset. And that lets you select up what conference, what you want to listen to, and volumes. Now, all of these guys can be collapsed for convenience. Below there, we have our 2-wire inputs, and there's various types. Mark's going to take you through that, and also the 4-wire, and this is how we do our assignments. There's also on the back, there's auxiliary I/O, and this is how we do the assignments for those. We have our stage announce function, our relay assignments, and at the very bottom, there's a readout for when we go into our auto null for our 2-wire system. So again, we'll take you through that a little bit later in detail. So that's the control unit. If I go into the hub, again, it's going to give us any information that we have that's live, the ability to name it, a list view if we have multiples. But there's very little to change in the hub. It's really just a naming convention. Now, if we go to our transceivers, they're slightly different than one another. Again, we have the ability to name it. We can go into a list view and look at all of the transceivers. And let's just take a look at the list view of what we have the ability to look at here. We have the long and short name. We have the serial numbers, the model number, an ID, which we use for internal for device, and then the radio band. Now, I'm going to show you first the 900. We have the ability to go high, low, or mixed. So high band, we broadcast 902 to 928. High band is going to be 915 to 928. And low band is going to be 902 to 915. So we can actually split the bands. And that's useful for a couple of different reasons. One of the things is that you may have two systems in an area that can't be synchronized together, can't work together, and you can band split. The other thing is we have a large entertainment company that was doing an event at a venue that was using the LED bracelets that go around your wrist, and those were being controlled off of 900. So what we did was in the arena, we worked in the high band and they worked in the low band, so there was no conflict. Now, the mixed allows you to do something interesting. It allows us to have high band in one area, low band in another area, and roam back and forth between them, even though they're on two different bands. So it really gives us a lot of flexibility if you've got any conflicts or other people trying to use frequencies that you're working in. On the 2.4, it's a little bit different. And here we have just high and low. And these radio frequencies will change depending on how you decide to assign it. Okay, so it will tell you that you have to put them all the same. And now you can see that it changed both of them, even though I selected one. Hopping patterns. This is another thing that changes and varies depending on who your specific setup is. So in the banding, let me go back to full band here for a second. So in the 900 band, we have a total of 14 hopping patterns. If you're using a single system, it will automatically assign the hopping patterns for you, or you're free to set them manually. If you're using multiple systems that are synchronized together, you're going to want to double check and make sure that you're not using the same patterns on both systems. In the 2.4 system, rather, we have 38 different hopping patterns available, and we can get a pretty big system in there. And both of these can work, as you can see. If we go back to the diagram, I have one system and even one connection where I'm using two different frequencies. The system itself doesn't really care about frequency, the network itself. The only RF components are actually inside of the transceiver and inside of the belt packs. So that's a pretty basic configuration. What I'm going to do now is, Art, let me come back to you for a second. Why don't you show the slide of the venue that we've made up?
Okay, just 1 second. I will take it back. Okay, everybody should be seeing the fake award show layout.
Okay, so this is an example of a awards show that you might be doing, on site, and you can see. Sorry, 1 second here. You can see that we have a truck outside in the of the venue. We have the control units mounted inside the truck along with a hub. We're then doing distribution out to local antennas right at the truck and the truck yard area. We have one out at a loading dock in a different area. We have our backstage transceiver for coverage there. We have a dressing room also in the back area. And then we have two covering the stage and two covering front of house. Now, one of the unique attributes of the system is our ability to give you rights or login ability by individual user or group of users for each of these transceivers. So these could be laid out for a group of people to go to all of them. You could have some people that are just in the trucks and dock area and don't have accessibility on the front of house or stage. And the same thing, you could have your front of house guys who have no need to go out to the trucks and you don't give them rights to log in. So it's fairly versatile, but this is this configuration that we're going to use for today's presentation. So it's our fake award show. So let me, Art, if you'll hand it back to me.
Okay.
All right.
It's all yours.
Okay. And here we come. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and close this file, and I'm not going to save it. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open this configuration and show you what it looks like and explain it to you. Okay. And as you can see, I have lots of different configurations available. This file is called the CCF file, and .ccf stands for CrewCom configuration file. And this represents all of the settings for a system. It's all of the users, all of the devices, all of your settings are in one specific file, and it's very transportable, very easy to use. And once you build up this configuration, you can load it, you can email it to somebody, you can load it into a control unit either directly online or through a USB front, the USB front port. And that's a really big advantage, because if you're a rental company or somebody's on site, or even if if you're a sales person and a customer needs help with a configuration, you can actually email it to them. If it's a rental and they've gone in and played with some buttons because they were curious and got themselves into trouble, all they have to do is put the email on a flash drive, put it back in the front and reload it. They're right back in business. So one of the things you're going to see here is this demonstration, this layout has two control units. It has one hub, and then you're going to see across the top a number of transceivers. And you notice that this one has my initials on it, GR Truck 1. This is another 2.4 GR Truck 2, and my 2900s. When you look here, you will see it says AG for Art Gonzalez, and you look at these at the bottom, they say MR for Mark Reefus. Now, the reason we've done that is because each one of us has a system that's live in our home offices that we're working with. But none of us have this much hardware sitting in our home offices. So we split the system up and built the configuration to show all of them. But when I go live on my system, the only ones that will be active will be the master, the hub, and these 4 transceivers. None of the others will light up. They'll be grayed out because I don't actually have that hardware. So I want to go through the system and show you what we have here. And you'll notice when I connect to it, you'll see there's more information than we had before. For example, the firmware version 1.8.03. And that's because this is an actual live configuration that we've saved. So I'm going to come into the master, and you will see here it's the same that I showed you before, except we have our actual IP addresses. And you notice that I've done a DHCP to my network server. This is a standard IP interface and a standard application. So the interface is quite straightforward. If I go into my list view, you will see both transceivers. Even though nothing's hooked up, I can come in here and I can configure it. So we're, if we take a look here, you'll notice that we're offline. So I have access to all of these, okay? And all of my transceivers. So this is what another transceiver view. And we can come in here, and here's our ID. Here's the same information a different way, our hopping patterns. And one of the things we try to do is give you a number of different views because people like to work in different ways. So before you had the list view, okay, and that's what we were looking at. And if I come back in here to the individual view, I have a previous and next, and I can go back and forth between the different transceivers, and you'll see these changing as we go. So the other components, and I'm going to just go over these quickly, is the conferences. So Mark is going to take you through conferences and profiles, but these are basically our PLs. And the profile is basically what I'm seeing on an individual's pack or a group pack. For example, an application like a Spotlight Guy or Camera Guy. And we have group management. And there's a couple of other things in here. One is an event log. And I'm going to go ahead and set the event back up. Oh, sorry. There we go. Okay, so in our logs, what we have, this is what you'll see when you first open the screen. It's not live, so I have no radio packs available, but I do have an event log, and this event log will show us anything that's happened over time. So you notice it says files open and closed. We have a timestamp of power on, and this log, as long as you're connected to the computer, logs in everything. We have the ability to send these to our engineers. Should you have a problem, we can take a look at your files. And we can click on any one of these events and get individual information on them. So there's quite a bit of diagnostics available within the system. So the next thing I'm going to do is, now that we've done that, we've built a basic configuration, is I'm going to go ahead and connect to the system that I have next to me that's actually live. And the way I'm going to do that is by clicking my offline button and selecting the IP address. Now, I'm using DHCP, so I just went to the front panel of the control unit and went into the menu and looked at my LAN, and it told me what IP my system addressed it. So that's why it's 0.114. It's just my individual network that gave it. And now we're going to go ahead and we're going to go live, and you can see it loading. And you'll see several things happening. The top right, you see it's now showing you live, and it says system status okay. In just a moment, what you're going to see, it's going to go to an error condition. And that's because it's showing the systems and components that I have currently hooked up. But I don't have a second control unit. I don't have marks, transceivers, or ARTs. And so down in the bottom, I can scroll down and it tells you the device is missing. And so we really have a lot of information available. The other thing now is you will see that I have 3 belt packs that are currently connected, and we happen to name them. It's also telling me what transceiver I'm connected to, that I'm logged in. Lots of good information here. If I come up to the transceivers, you'll notice that it's fully populated with all the information, hopping patterns, IDs, etc. But you'll also see at the top, we have 6 green dots. Well, they're gray if they're not logged in, but we have up to 6 green dots. That's the 6 slots, 6 users per transceiver. And I happen to have a couple that are logged in here. These are my belt packs. It's showing me the belt packs. And if I actually press a talk button, you'll see that the little white band circles around it. You'll also see that at the bottom here. And I'll take you into some more of the belt pack information. So you see that I have 2 2.4s and 1 900 currently up and running. We can actually take this live configuration file, and we can do a file and save as. So I could make a modification in this file. Let's say my modification was simply changing the name. Okay, now that I've done that, I can come in and I can do a file and save it as, and load it into my control unit, and now that would be the new name. Art?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention a little bit of just a side note. I know you're live and you're changing the name of the hardware, which is totally legal. The one exception to that is the hub. Currently, you can't change the hub name. So make sure you get that. If you want to name your hub, make sure you do that in the offline state and then
Right,
upload
good
it.
point. And some of the settings you can't actually do in live state. For example, if I went to a transceiver, I cannot change my hopping patterns. I can't change my bands. Those have to be done offline. And you think about it, it kind of makes sense. You don't want to change your RF while you're connected to a system. So there are a few that are like that. But you can see there's quite a bit of good information in here. Now, once I have my file, and if you take a look as you see here, I have, yeah, let me just show you what the file looks like. You can see I have lots and lots of files that we do and increment them. There's an autosave in here. Once I have that, I have 2 ways, because that's actually stored on my computer. Let me just bring us back in live. So those files are stored on my computer. I have 2 ways of getting that file into the control unit. One way is to simply take a USB drive from my computer into the front of the control unit, or if I'm connected live, I can actually upload the file directly. So if there's an upload, I would choose the file that I want to upload, and when I hit open, it will push it out to the control unit. It will take me offline because it's a new configuration. The control unit will take 30 seconds to a minute to load in the configuration depending on the size, and then you do need to reboot because it's a brand new configuration that you need to put into the system. So you'll do a power sequence. In our latest version of software, by the way, that's out in firmware 1.8, we do have the ability to hot plug all of these devices. So I can physically unplug and replug. But if we're going to change a configuration, that is something that we do need to repower for, so the system wakes up with the new information. So I think, Art, unless I've missed anything, I think it's time to hand it off to you.
Yeah, I think we can do that. Let me take control here. And I am going to go back to, this is the example again, just in case somebody didn't see it. You should be seeing the actual fake award show layout. And then I'm going to switch over my screen actually to the same things Gary was showing, except you'll see on my screen, as Gary mentioned, everything that I don't have hardware-wise is grayed out. And the things that I do have, in this case, I have two RTs, two 900 RTs. I'm live, by the way, not offline. I'm actually online looking at my system. You can see my hardware behind me. As you can see, I have one control unit. You'll see the two control unit. You'll see that second control unit light up when Mark gets on because he has two control units. But you see in my office here, you see one control unit, a hub, and two RTs, and then three packs that are logged into the system. A couple of things to point out. We do have two control units in this particular application or CCF. And the reason is actually a couple of different things. When you add a second control unit, gives you more IO depending on which, in this case, we're using two 4x4s. So you're basically getting double the amount of IO because you have a control unit, a second control unit on the system. One thing to also mention is you'll notice this is plugged into a hub. This secondary CU, which on my system, because I don't have the hardware, isn't showing up, could be located anywhere on the network, as long as it's somewhere on the CrewNet network. It doesn't have to be in that truck. It could be somewhere under the stadium or something. So if you need to tie in IOs in another remote location, all of that IO is going to show up on that secondary CU. Mark's going to show you how to assign all the IO, but that hardware can live anywhere on the system. The other thing to mention with having two CUs is each control unit determines the number of radio packs that you can have on your system. The transceiver designates how many in an RF space. The control unit decides how many total on the system, on the entire system. The control unit can support up to 18 packs. And if you were to look at the hardware itself on the front panel, you can't really see it on my camera here, but there's a little grid that shows all of your packs. You'll see up to 18 packs on that grid. By adding a second CU, you can now have 36 packs on your system. So if you need a lot of packs on the system, you're going to have to add more CUs. You can add up to a total of 4 CUs, each one giving you 18 packs. So if you really need to, you can really grow into a fairly large system by adding more control units. And that also gives you more IO. The other part of this is, as Gary mentioned, a really important thing, and this is really something that's new in our latest firmware. So if you're a user that has our system, make sure you update to the latest firmware. What we've done here is we've essentially, at least from my standpoint, we've overbuilt the system. As you can see, even though there's an error that's showing up here, really that's just telling me that there are devices missing, but in reality, my system's working fine. There's no issues. I'm running on the two RTs. I'm basically over-designed the system, so to speak. And this allows me to come back later, and if I want to, and I'll give you an example a little bit later, I can plug in these devices as I need them. And that way, when I plug something in, then it'll add that to the configuration, not add it to the configuration, but it'll bring it online into the configuration as I go. Hot plugging or hot swapping. Or if I need to change out a transceiver or something like that, gives me the ability to do that.
Yeah, just a quick comment. One thing I actually didn't show. If you look on the left-hand side, you're going to see all of the hardware. And what you see, the ones with the red dots are actually offline. So if you were in a configuration and then somebody accidentally cut a wire or pulled something out, you didn't know about it, you would see that device offline. It'll go gray out, and you'll see it on the left also if you're looking at different views. Let's say you had 36 belt packs up and you weren't looking at your system, but only belt packs. You might not see the view for the system diagram, but you'd still know that you're offline looking at the panel on the left.
That's right. And those red dots that Gary just mentioned are actually duplicated here, as you can see when they're grayed out. And that's just designating an error, really. But one of the things we do have this error alert up here. Just keep them. There are different states to it, different colors and so forth. So everything in this case is okay because it's just really alerting you that, hey, you don't have everything plugged in that you said you were going to plug in. The other thing to mention is, as Gary, I think, briefly touched on, is when you do create a configuration, You need to make sure that you actually are plugging into the physical ports as they're shown in the configuration. The hub can sometimes get a little bit confusing because there's so many ports on there, but if you hover over, it does tell you which connector that is. Port, as you can see here, hopefully you can see it says CrewNet number 1, CrewNet number 2, 3, et cetera, on the hub. Anytime you see this designation here, which shows a copper and a fiber, that means it can be a copper connection or a fiber connection. As an example, if I had this AG stage left plugged directly into the control unit, I would be able to basically toggle between fiber or copper, and as Gary showed, the color of the actual line would change to purple, kind of showing you what that looks like. So anyhow, that's also fiber to keep in mind, as we've mentioned, does require a power supply. So if I did run fiber out to this transceiver here, you would need a local power supply. In this particular case, everything could be done PoE. The only exception to that maybe would have to be the hub, because you're running a fiber connection here, you would locally power that hub. And we typically recommend you go ahead and locally power the hub, although in a smaller configuration, it would not be a requirement. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the pack itself. So hopefully you may want to make your screen a little bit bigger to show my camera, because I'm going to show a little bit about the pack. In addition to showing it on the software screen, I want to actually kind of show you on the pack itself some of the display functionalities that actually show up both in the software and in the hardware. As we showed earlier, there are two types of packs. There's a 2-volume and a 4-volume pack. Yes, sir, Gary.
Yeah, just when you go to show the pack, if you actually don't share your screen, it'll be much bigger for the viewers. They'll be able to see it much easier.
Oh, okay. Yep, appreciate that. So yeah, I'll do that first. So let me stop sharing my screen for a second. Actually, that didn't work because it looks like you're looking at the CrewWare Live.
No, well.
I see you.
I see you. Yeah, we're
Right.
seeing you.
Oh, you are? Okay. On my audience view, it shows differently. Okay, good. So what I'll do is I'll kind of show you the screen. This is a 2-volume pack here. As I just showed you, there's a 4-volume pack. Actually, let me go ahead and show you the 4-volume pack, because that way you'll be able to see the display itself. Mark's going to talk in detail about conferences and so forth, but as you can see on the pack, maybe a little bit fuzzy, but hopefully you can see that there's button indications. In this case, there's a stage and out button. There are 4 talk buttons on the top, and then there's 2 function buttons, one left and right. Those can be assigned. Once again, Mark's going to show you all that detail. But I did want to kind of show you a little bit from a hardware standpoint what the pack itself looks like. Now you'll see the 4 talk buttons, 4 volume buttons, allows you to control the volume of all your different conferences that are coming into that pack with individual volume controls. In addition to that, there's actually a push button on the each one of the talk buttons, and that's true for the 2-volume as well, and that's for ISO. That'll be explained in just a second, but those are ISO there. One other thing to point out, because I'm going to show you this next, is there's a USB port on the side. That USB port under the cap is used for a couple of things. It's used for pairing a pack to the system. As I mentioned earlier, you can pair up to 18 packs per control unit. So if you have more than 18, you basically pair 18 to one control unit and 18 to another control unit. So that allows you to pair the unit. It also, you can charge through that USB port. And in addition to that, you can update the firmware, which I will show that as well, how you do that. So let's show you how to pair the pack first of all. And first I'm going to show you on the camera, and then I'll show you essentially what happens on the screen, and then kind of show you on the software what happens as well. So there should be a standard USB to micro cable that comes with each one of your packs. If not, just make sure you use a good quality cable. There are some cables out there that are cheap that are just used for charging. Be careful. Make sure you use one that actually is used. Recommended that you use the one that's supplied. But when you plug in to the control unit, what I'm doing is I'm pairing this pack to the system. So I'm just plugging directly into the USB on the front of the control unit. In this case, it's the master control unit because it's the only one that I have. So I'm going to plug it in, and it will come up and it will say on the control unit, it says start pairing. And then after it goes through a couple of little short menus, what comes up is a selection screen. And Mark's going to talk a lot more about profiles, but what's coming up is my selection of my profiles. In this case, I only have 2 profiles that I can select. So I will basically scroll to the profile that I want for this pack, and then I will enter, which is the function button. And what it did, it is actually loading that particular profile onto this pack. So now it's paired to the system, and if I unplug it, it powers down on its own, and now it's part of the system. Now you have to do that with each pack one time. So if you have 18 packs, you're going to pair all 18 packs individually, and then you will basically have those part of the system now. So those become part of the system.
And one thing to keep in mind, it is a very fast process, but by having a physical pairing, it really makes it a very secure system. Because if you set it up and you haven't done a pairing, you don't have a cable connected, if a belt pack disappears, they're not connecting to anything else, nobody's listening in, and you can change that at any time. So it really does enhance the security of the system.
Yeah, absolutely, great point. Part of that as well, as you can see here, when I paired, this is the pack here down in my, what we call our radio pack farm. I'm still live, by the way, just so you know. So I'm still plugged into the system. I have 2 packs that came up that I never really did anything with. The one that I paired, when I paired it, it powers it down. So that's why it went offline here. So if I were to power it back up, it would show up back on here. But I did want to kind of show you one thing. And this is actually a new feature that was added fairly recently, but if I right click on that particular device, there is an unpair. So it is possible that you can have, let's say you're a rental company, or you're running a lot of systems, sending them out different places every week. You may have packs paired to a control unit that you forgot about months ago. If you go into live and you look at your system on the live view, you actually, if you had any packs paired to your system, they would show up down here at the bottom. Since I've actually enacted the system and went live, they don't show up down here. But when I first started up, if there were any packs that were paired to the system that I didn't know about and I don't have here anymore, they would show up down here at the bottom. And this is basically a list of all the packs that are paired. This is a list of all packs that are either active or have recently been active or logged into the system. But I can unpair those. So if I have some stray packs down there that are taking up slots for those 18 packs, I can unpair them very easily just by right-clicking and unpairing. And it'll say, "Are you sure?" And you say, "Okay," and then you've unpaired that pack. Moving along, as Gary mentioned, he briefly touched on the hopping patterns. We're actually going to give you an example of a real life situation where we synchronized 2 systems together and we had to basically manually put in the hopping patterns. But just in general, hopping patterns, since we are using a frequency hopping spread spectrum, whether it's the 900 band or the 2.4 band, essentially it's basically transmitting very small slivers of RF constantly across the entire band. And each one of the transceivers has its own hopping pattern. So when you roam a pack from one transceiver to another, it automatically changes over to the new hopping pattern. But the hopping pattern is determined right here in the software. And as Gary mentioned, you can't change that while you're live, because for obvious reasons. Plus, when you change a hopping pattern, it's going to affect the whole system. It has to update everybody's packs and so forth. So that's really important to remember.
Yeah,
Yes.
one thing I just want to mention, because Art was just talking about synchronizing systems, there are several ways that systems can work together. You can have, as I showed you in the diagram, and Art, just click on system for a second. You'll see here that this is one system with 2 different control units, and you'll see both light up when Mark goes to his presentation. But we can also take different individual systems and synchronize them together so they work compatibly in the same RF area without any conflict, which is another fairly unique property. You'll find that the DEC systems really don't play very well together with individual systems, but we can do very large scale synchronization. We'll show you some examples of that, but there are 2 different ways to do that. We'll get into a little bit more of that later.
Yeah, actually, that's a great segue, because I am going to switch over back to my PowerPoint. And let's talk about synchronization of two systems. This is an actual real life situation that we had when we had to synchronize two systems. This is in Houston, Texas. This is NRG Stadium. NRG Stadium has a system that they use for their event production. Every home game, they have this system. They use it to do all the video. They've got guys roaming around doing videos on the field. They've got production assistants helping do all the, in between games and stuff that they play, and one in Toro's dressing room so people can bring him out when he's ready and all that kind of stuff. So anyhow, the actual in-stadium production is done by this system here on the left. As you can see, it's a fairly large system. I mean, it's 5, 6, 7, it's 8 transceivers. So it became a little bit of a challenge because we had our Thursday night football production crew coming in, and they had a lot of transceivers that they wanted to bring in because this is what they usually travel with to all the different stadiums around the NFL. They do kind of a pre and a post show. The NFL Network does, and that's why you see an inside set here. That's basically where they have their set that they roll out on the sideline before and after the show, and they do their production. But they needed coverage all over the place: locker rooms, field, out by the truck, a little bit down under, in the vomitoriums and some of the areas underneath the stadium. So they've got stuff deployed all over the place. And by the way, this is all done by fiber, and they've also got even transceivers way outside in the parking lot where they do kind of a pre-game, post-game show. Then the transceiver itself actually lives inside the truck, which is out by the truck yard. So basically what we had to do is, as Gary mentioned, this is all 900, by the way. As he mentioned, the 14 is the maximum number of RTs that you can put in one location. However, because we have the ability to manually input hopping patterns, that plus the ability to synchronize the two systems. And if I showed the connection here, there would actually be a fiber connection going from the Thursday night football system to the NRG Stadium system. And essentially all it is a synchronization signal. There's no audio, no other data being transmitted between the two systems. It's really just to make sure that all those hopping patterns are occurring at the same time. 100 times a second, it's changing frequencies, but you need to make sure that all happens at the same time. Otherwise, it drifts and then they start to step on each other. But you'll notice what we tried to do is we tried to put even hopping patterns on the NFL Network system and then use mostly odd patterns on the NRG Stadium. As you can see, we couldn't do that completely because we ran out of number of hopping patterns. So then we had to take into account how far away are transceivers from each other. So physically, if there's a transceiver under the stadium, on the completely opposite side of the stadium, we could use a hopping pattern that's fairly close to the other system. And in some cases, when it comes to the outside set, we actually reused hopping patterns from the other system, because you can see here in the service area under the stadium, number 7 here and also number 13 on the north side of the field are being reused on the Thursday night football system outside, because it's completely outside of the stadium. So we really didn't have to worry about RF bleeding between the two. So a lot of things to consider, but really this really shows the flexibility of the system to be able to operate within pretty large parameters and being able to bring two systems together. As Gary mentioned, there are a couple of ways to do it. In this particular case, we actually synchronized two systems with a fiber and then basically managed all the hopping patterns. Another way is we could have done 2 half-band systems, although that wouldn't have worked here because there was just way too many transceivers involved in order to do that. But there are other ways to do it for smaller systems and so forth. This is actually kind of taking it to the max. All right, so I'm actually completed my portion of this particular segment. So I am now going to hand it off to Mark Rifus, and he's actually going to get into more of the conferences and the profiles and so forth. So Mark, I will hand it off to you and should be able to take over. There's Mark, good to see you.
Hey, how are you? I got some big shoes to follow here, guys. Nice presentations, Mr. Gonzalez and Mr. Rosen. And I'm Mark. I'm the regional sales manager for Pliant Technologies, and I'm going to show you some cool stuff here, I think, today. Starting with one of the building blocks of the configuration file and of this active system that we're operating in is the conference. And the conference is, in essence, a party line. It's a channel on an older system, and you can have up to 64 of these created within the configuration file. And it's simply by adding a button. You're adding more conferences there. They become sequentially numbered, and it add on to whatever's existing there right now. Next to the conference, now you've got the conference name, and this name here is what we'll see a lot in our CrewWare application. And then the short name, as mentioned before, is what's going to be seen on the belt pack itself. The short name can have 8 characters. The long name can have up to 16 characters. So just a little FYI there, 8 characters for the short name, and that's what will be seen on the belt pack. ISO allowed. ISO is, and I pulled up a slide from one of our presentations that we use. And what it is, can you guys see that slide?
No, we can't. You need to share the PowerPoint application if you want to switch over to PowerPoint.
Okay. Sorry, everyone, I'm getting this all down as we go here. So within the PowerPoint, it's not this. It's not in this one. Rats. So anyway, getting back to my CrewWare demonstration here. The conferences are the building blocks and the basis. And I was talking about ISO. ISO is essentially selectable talk around. And what the ISO button is on the belt pack itself, on your volume knob, you push that button in. And if ISO is assigned to the conference, and if your belt pack is using the profile with ISO enabled on it, you will be able to have a secondary conversation over top of an existing conference without disturbing anybody else that's monitoring that particular conference party line. And that, it can be useful. In a lot of cases, we've noticed that a lot of our dealers and a lot of our users will create an ISO channel alone within their belt packs. And you don't have to do that anymore. You can have 2 actual party lines going on this 2-channel belt pack here that I'm looking at, the rigging belt pack, and then have a ISO on top of channel B. So once we've created all of the conferences, and we can now go to our system diagram, and as everyone mentioned before, I've got 2 control units, so you can actually see that both my control units are lit up. And a thing to note is that most of the work that I'm doing with the system, when you're loading everything onto it, when you're tying into it with your computer, is through the master. That's where you make your LAN connection, and the master is the only device, the only control unit that's going to store the CCF file. The secondary unit does not need a CCF file. It's just a drone. It basically wakes up and lives off of the logic that's inside of the master. So now we're going to dive into the master. And I'm going to get rid of my pack farm down here. And starting at the top, Gary showed you all of this stuff here. I'm going to focus on the ports here. I'm going to focus on the 2-wire ports and the 4-wire ports. Starting with the 2-wire ports, this top drop-down menu is all of the conferences that I created in that previous conference tab. And each of them can be assigned to any of the 2-wire or 4-wire ports. And they can be double assigned for use for passing through information using CrewNet, our network, our proprietary network, as a bridge between audio, analog, intercom systems. So this is where you select the conferences and you assign them. And just to show you, I can double assign Pyro on two wire lines if I choose to there, but I'm gonna go back up there and put in production assistant. Now, beneath that, there's several different types of 2-wire that are available on the market that are being widely used these days. There's RSTS channel 1, channel 2, there's AudioComm, and there's ClearComm. So I'm going to select this port to operate within the ClearComm protocol. And then as we move down, I have my level in to adjust and gain structure that channel so I get good clear audio on it. And again, on my output, I could adjust that from here so that my audio is not distorted and it's clear. I can enable the call on my inbound, so I will feel my belt pack vibrate if somebody on the wired system hits the call button, or if they have call enabled on that conference. And I can also do the opposite, where I can push my conference, and when I push that button, it will call everyone that's monitoring that conference. I can have it set up so that my microphone kill will follow through and kill mics on a wired system, as well as echo cancellation being turned on and off, and being able to null a port, which are all important aspects of a 2-wire connection. And then we have our 4-wire connection down here, which is simply, you again assign the conference and you turn it on or off. And then you're off to the races. You got your gain structure here and your echo cancellation here. So now that we've gotten that far, what I would like to then do is we're going to go over to the profile management. And really, as Gary had mentioned before, there's multiple views within each of these tabs. So if I go up here and as I click on this guy, I can go to list view, which is, this is the control unit once again. I can hit list view, and now I can get a 10,000 foot view of where all of my conferences are being managed from here, which is, this is a really powerful screen, especially in this multi-control unit system. And in profile management, it's the same deal. I have a list view, which just gives me a very quick overview. But then as I hit this triangle here, I then get an exploded view of what the Pyro profile looks like from a 10,000 foot view. And then I can dive in deeper to Pyro and then actually see more of what's happening here. So let's take a tour of this particular card in the profile management tab. We have the name up here, 16 characters in the top profile name, 8 characters in the short name. We have the particular model of belt pack that's being used here. In this case, we're using a 2-knob 900 megahertz radio pack. This radio pack has the ability to access these particular radio transceivers that are deployed across our facility. I could go in here and add a few more if I chose to, front of house, for example. And then now anyone that is using this profile can then roam freely between all of these areas on our fake award show. So this is what we call a scan list for the radio transceivers. And this is where, by the profile, you allow people to have access to that radio transceiver and that area of coverage. Call alert can be set up here to be audible, vibrate, or off, or both. And in this particular case, it's on both. And then this is the group that I'm going to get to in a moment. This is where you assign that. And this is where the pyrotechnic guy will be part of a group on a different screen. I'll show you in a moment. And then moving down here, we have Pyro, which is the name of the conference. And these are the conferences that I can assign to button number 1. So I have Pyro here because this is the Pyro user profile. And then he wants a momentary button for his belt pack. Now, if he wants to go to latched for some reason, I can very simply change that. And once I change it, I can upload that to the belt pack, and it's going to change on the belt pack. Director, momentary here, once again, the same thing for button B. Then we have 2 function mode buttons here that I'll show you in another profile, which let me get to right now. So taking back a step and taking a look at my system, I have 6 belt packs set up here, and they're assigned to 3 different groups. The groups that we have set up are production, pyro, and stage. And via the profile here is where I assign them to the group. So that is one of the new features that our current version of firmware 1.8.0.3 is using and offers, which in order to see what firmware you're using on your CrewWare, you can go to help and go to about, and it'll give you your version of firmware right there. So getting to a interesting profile that's got a little bit of stuff going on in it that I want us to talk about. Larry's profile here, and Larry's a person, and there's a couple different things about profiles that are interesting to consider. You can assign a profile to an individual to utilize, and that one person will only have that profile. And there's up to 64 profiles available for assignment. And there's a couple different mentalities. Most broadcasters will assign a bunch of people to a profile that they'll all share. So all of the stage hands will have one profile. The camera assistants will have another profile, for example. But on a lot of live events that are occurring in stadiums and where there's people running around during a live event, they're assigning individual profiles to each person. And there's a lot of powerful reasons to do that. This is where you're assigning ISO. And Larry has ISO enabled to talk to the stage manager conference. So on that stage manager conference, when he pushes his ISO, he will be in contact with several people who are allowed to use ISO. And in that world, Mark's conference, Mark's profile, which is over here, also has access. He's sharing the same profile. And Mark Spellpack, that's me, I have availability of ISO on Stage Manager. So I can have a private conversation over top of Stage Manager conference via ISO with Larry. So that gives you a pretty good overview of what you're dealing with profiles and how powerful they are, where they allow you to have, the conferences are assigned to each individual user. They are the places where the user can go into, or the RTs that the user can log into. They also give the user expanded rights for ISO capability to have additional conversations, and they expand the amount of conferences and methods of communication that are available to that particular user via that profile. So again, profiles can go to an individual, or they can go to a group of people and be used. And you can have up to 64 different profiles. So,
Hey, Mark, before you jump off of profiles, can you please explain, we saw when I did the pairing, a list of profiles. How do I access the profiles, or how do I change them on the packs?
so on the pack, let me see if I can stop sharing, I guess. Right? Thank you. So on the pack, and this is gonna be kind of weird, you got this button here. And that's a triangle button on the top of the belt pack for the LC above the display. If I push and hold that button in, it goes into the secondary, it goes into the main menu area. So backing out, let me do this a little bit better. That's your primary view that you can't really see, and I can't see on my screen, I'm sorry. There's two views when you push the button, and then when you hold it in, it gets you to a deeper main menu. And in that main menu, I have the ability to recall a user profile in the device settings header. So once I go through device settings, I get to pack profiles and select a profile from the belt pack. That's one way of doing it. And then, can I share my screen again, please?
Actually, I think you already are. It never stopped, at least for me. I still see your screen.
Can you see my CrewWare now?
Yes.
Perfect. So I always tend to go back to system diagram as my home base. And as Gary had mentioned, everybody works differently. So, you know, in Mark's belt pack, I like to go back here and just sort of get to home base and grab Mark's belt pack. And then once I'm there, this is the profile that is assigned to Mark. So now what I can do is I can give him a different profile. And it's going to say, "You're sure you want to do this, you silly man?" And I'm going to go, "Yes, I'm feeling quite adventurous today and want to tempt fate." So here I am tempting fate. And now Mark has a different profile, and I have a different set of conferences that are available to me. And as you'll notice, I don't have any ISOs anymore. I'm not quite as, cool as I was before with Larry's profile. So if I go back to Larry's profile, you'll see that it's changed, and I picked up Stage Manager, and I have an ISO there on my third button number C. And this also brings a good point up to mention here. When you are dealing with button number C, what I've done here is I've actually short loaded a particular profile where now that button is blank and it doesn't operate, but I have 3 conferences available to me. Yes, sir.
I just want to point out something. If you click on the down arrow for the profile right there.
Data arrow error.
Assign profile. So you'll notice that there's only 2 profiles available here. Could you go back to the profile management tab for a second?
Of course. Profile. The right tab would be helpful.
Yes. So what you'll see is there's lots of profiles, but the reason there's only 2 available is because each device type will have its own profile. So there are 4 different possibilities. There's a 2-volume 900, a 2-volume 2.4, and a 4-volume 900, and a 4-volume 2.4. And the only thing you will have available to you for an individual pack is the profiles for that pack type. So that's why you only saw 2, even though Mark has 13 different profiles available within the system.
Thank you, Gary. So with that being said, also when I changed that profile for Mark's belt pack, he switched over to the production assistant area and he went into the groups of production. So if I go back to Mark's belt pack and change that profile back to Larry, you're going to see him hop down here to Pyro. And this is all real time. This is happening. I've got the systems running. I'm live. And here I am. So that's my view here. Now, there's a couple different views in the pack farm that are worth mentioning here. I could right click on here, and this is tile view, which gives you a very comprehensive readout of what's going on each of the belt packs. And when you click on it, you see the actual front panel of Mark's belt pack. And if I push a button, now I'm talking to the director, and I can see that from the software. And if any of these buttons were latched, I could do a mic kill. And then I can also go to what we call icon view, which is a smaller view, which is helpful if I really need to monitor this screen a lot. I can get a little bigger with this screen and then be able to hover over things and see what's going on as I need to go and diagnose things quickly. And then what I have here is a couple different organized bys. Right now it's organized by group. And if I uncheck that, it now goes to just where it's just the belt packs that are alive right now. And I can right click again and organize by the radio transceivers that they're logged into and who they're talking to. So I can see where they're logged into, which can be helpful if I want to be careful of overloading a radio transceiver that only has 6 slots on it. So that's a couple different views there that are available to you. You could sort them by name and model expand. There's many different things there to noodle around with as you have time to do so. One thing I wanted to talk about was the hot swapping. So I'm unplugging my dressing room radio transceiver. And now what I'm physically going to do, I'm plugging in one of Art's radio transceivers, which should come up shortly if I plugged everything in correctly.
Okay. Art, well, Mark, while that's coming up, we had a question that I want to address. So when you have multiple control units and a large system, so if you had, let's say, 3 control units and 30 users, the question was, do I need to synchronize them equally when you pair them up? How do I pair multiple belt packs along with multiple control units?
That's a great question.
Yeah, really good question. So each of the control units is capable for up to 18 users. So you could pair 18 to the first one and 12 to the second one. That would give you 30, and pair nothing to the third one. or you could pair 10, 10, and 10 to each of the 3 control units. From an operational standpoint, there's absolutely no difference at all. It really doesn't matter how you load them. It doesn't change anything. The reason you might want to do it 10, 10, and 10 and balance them out is because if for some reason you lost power to one control unit, somebody pulled a cable or something, at that point, you've still got 20 on rather than 30 users. But it really doesn't matter. You can balance the system anyway, and it really won't care.
Hey, Gary, before you, well, too late. There's another question that came in. I'll read it to you. It says, when live editing, what happens if you lose power before the CCF file is saved or loaded into the CCU?
Okay, so great question. So when you're editing and creating a new file, that's actually happening on your computer. It's not happening within a control unit. So if you lost power in a control unit, no harm at all. If your computer rebooted, it would go back and you'd open up the file to the last place that you saved it. And hopefully, as we've all learned over the years, as you're building a Word document or a computer file, you want to save as you go. So you will lose from the last save any changes going forward, but it actually won't hurt anything at all. Once the CCF file is complete and you load it into the control unit and it's loaded, at that point, it really won't care. Should you lose power during a load, you just restart the system and reload it.
Yeah, I'll just take this time to mention, I don't think we did mention that the control unit only has one CCF file on it. And actually in our new version of the firmware, you can actually see which CCF is on the hardware itself, which, by the way, the software is not required to run the system. It can run without the software. I don't think we've mentioned that. But if you're like Mark was doing, making all these changes and uploading profiles and adding conferences and everything, all while he's live, that all gets saved onto the CCF that's on the control unit. So as Gary mentioned, if your PC were to go down, all that information is already in the CCF that's on the control unit. So,
right. So once you've made, if you're live and you've made your changes, you've made your naming changes, go ahead and save it.
right.
And then you've got a backup, but it's already in the control unit. And then you've got the revised should you need to go to a different CCF and then go back to the one that you edited. So it's really pretty versatile, pretty flexible that way.
Can we go back to the config file view? Is that me or is that you, Art, that does that?
You're still looking at it. We're all still looking at your config file.
Okay, that's weird.
Nope,
How about now?
Nope, not anymore. Nope, there it is. It's back.
Great. Okay. So as I was demonstrating before Gary came along and mentioned that other piece of information, I recut in one of Art's radio transceivers, which brings to a valid point. If you have any kind of a radio transceiver that fails, or if you're taking a configuration file and you're operating part of your system and you're going to add more radio transceivers on or remove them from there and short load it, this position, it lives only in the software and in the network. It doesn't live with the radio transceiver. So as long as this radio transceiver that I'm about to plug into the system is operating in the same firmware as the system is, there'll be no problems. It'll wake right up. It'll assume the name that it was assigned via the configuration file, and it'll start allowing users to log in and start allowing them to get to work. So the RTs follow the port assignment on the system. They don't, the assignment doesn't live on the RT's hardware. Also, I want to hop offline here real quick. And then Art had mentioned about some of the things you can do with the radio transceivers and half band. And here's where this is a 2.4 one. I want to go to 900. In a 900 one, we can go in here and go to high, low, and mixed. We have 3 different versions now that are available to us. Art may want to explain mixed in his next cell, but you have the high, which is the, won't allow me to, yeah, it will allow me to do it if I could do it here. And it brings you to 915 to 928, and then low brings you to 902 to 915. And here's where the hopping pattern is assigned, which we're going to talk about in our next section, which is some of the real world applications. Also, a thing to note here is you have the ability we have removable antennas on our radio transceivers, which enables you to add on to the radio transceiver a directional antenna, or you can interface the radio transceiver into an existing RF network that may be in the facility. And this is where you'd want to go in and turn off those antennas, so you're only tapping into one antenna and using that. Or if you want to use two directional antennas on our dual antenna radio transceivers, you're welcome to do so and keep it in dual antenna. And this is where you would adjust that, and also transmit on L and receive on R. We also have the ability to gain up and down our antennas. So if you want to have just coverage in a nice tight room, you can bring it down to 10 dBm and you're good to go. And that's about all I wanted to talk about there, Mr. Gonzalez.
Okay, well, we will switch back over. Let me turn my camera back on.
I think I covered everything, right?
Yeah, I believe you did.
You're good.
All right, so we're gonna, actually, there was a kind of a follow-up to the question we had earlier. It said, so the CCF on the CCU is updated on the hardware in real time when live. And the direct answer to that is yes. As you make changes while you're in live, that automatically gets updated. You don't have to save the file and then upload it back to the control unit or to the system. That's not required. Really, the whole upload CCF is for when you create something offline, or if you want to change it to a completely different CCF, you do have to do the upload function, or take a thumb drive and plug it right into the front. But yes, to answer the question, yes, it is done live. So actually, I'm going to ask Gary to jump on, and we're going to jump into some applications, some actual applications. And the first one we have on the list is Monday Night Football. So we'll let him talk about that.
Yeah, the Monday Night Football is really pretty cool. It's obviously a mobile truck, and they're in different stadiums when football is running. And the way that they have their configuration is actually quite interesting. Inside the truck, they have 3 control units. Those 3 control units are synchronized in the system, all on our network through the copper hub, and those are all within the system. And then there's a fiber hub that goes out, and they use fiber distribution. Now, one of the things about the fiber is that these are SFP ports. So they're standard connections. We supply them with single mode dual fiber LC connectors. And that's what we support because we ship it that way and we understand the operation. But we've had many people who use a different type of SFP with success. So in this particular configuration, they use a single fiber. And one of the reasons they use a single fiber duplex is because a lot of stadiums, while they have fiber, don't really have enough fiber because so many companies are using it now. When they laid it in, they didn't have enough ports. So they'll go with a single mode fiber. They will go out for distribution to the field where they have a separate cart that then picks up each one of the fiber strands and lays it out to the different transceivers. Now, what you really can't see on here is the layout. Most of these transceivers are spread out throughout the stadium. They will take generally 12 to 14 users, will be all over the facility. They will put 4 of those transceivers within the bowl, and that will cover the entire bowl and all the users. And they will take one backstage. They will take a 1 or 2 for interview rooms or dressing rooms, and then they will have corridors, and they will have a couple out by the truck. So it's really quite a spread out environment. And they also tend to have, as you can see by the profiles and the conferences, they have a very specific operation, and they tend to do most of their profiles by individual operators. So they'll have, each person will have their own profile. There's a couple of advantages to doing that. One is if one specific person needs to change, anything you can do for them or with them, you have the ability to just go ahead and change that individual without affecting anybody else on a group. But they use this, week in, week out. The 900 band serves them very well. They just generally turn it on and go, which is great. We've had a couple of instances where people got a little overconfident, not these guys, but other people, because there can be other things in a 900 band. But this is the Monday Night Football. It's used day in and out. Mark?
Yeah, one thing that was worthy of noting is that during their actual game and their show, they strike and build a set on the field often. So they're unplugging and plugging in some of these radio transceivers during their daily work cycle, which is really neat, where they can tear some of the system down and put it back up again to get communications in that area.
Yeah, there are, I know, for example, the Super Bowl, they brought in and out different sets and moving. So definitely being able to configure live, have the configuration larger than needed. And again, being able to synchronize between multiple broadcasters that are all involved in the same show really does make life easier. Okay, Art?
Okay, yeah. Before we go any further, I do have one thing that I actually forgot to cover, which was firmware updates. This will be the last part of the actual CrewWare demonstration. Then we'll have just a couple more applications, and then we'll be done. As you see, I'm sorry?
If you could.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, nobody wants to see me. All right, I'm back. Yeah, as you see on the, I'm showing the system live here. As you notice, we went through pretty much all the tabs with one tab exception, and that's the firmware tab. I'm continuing to be in live mode so I can show you something specifically. Well, first of all, let me back up. When you download the software, so hopefully you do that off of our website, that actually comes as a package of not just CrewWare software, but also the firmware. Mark briefly mentioned that if you plug in a transceiver or something, it is actually checking to make sure that the firmware matches. So it is a requirement that the firmware matches. So if you have an old version in your rental stock or something, you plug it into the system, it will basically come up and say, hey, you can't do that. So anyhow, you do have to make sure that they're all on the same firmware. There's a couple of different ways to update the firmware. The primary way is through a USB port. So you basically take your PC, plug in using that same pairing cable, the regular USB end and the micro USB, and you essentially just plug into the actual, in this case, I'm going to do it with a pack, and I will actually go through it so that you can actually see what shows up on the screen. I'm not going to actually update it because it has already been updated, but it still will show you. The other thing to keep in mind is I'm doing a single item here. However, if you have a USB hub or multiple USB hubs, you can do multiples at the same time. So unlike pairing, which you have to do one at a time, with updating the firmware, you can do multiples using just a standard off-the-shelf USB hub. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on Scan for Devices, and anything that's plugged into your PC, in this case, I just have one pack, but if I had multiple packs to a hub, it would list all of them on the screen. As you can see, it comes up and gives you the model number, the serial number, tells you the device is ready, and this number here is the current firmware version that's on that pack. As I mentioned, mine's already been updated, but if it hadn't, it would say like 1.4 or 0.0 or something like that. I would click Update, and then it would update, and it would go through the progress and update the pack. The pack probably takes about 10 minutes or so. Control unit takes the longest, hub takes the shortest, and RT is kind of somewhere in between. Yes, Gary?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, you'll notice that Art has clicked on the USB devices, and there's also a network devices tab. So if you have a system that's up and running, we have a great way to do firmware updates, and I had to do this actually at an opera house in France that we have.
I can show you that. So
great.
Yeah.
So
you can go ahead and talk. I'll show.
So in this particular application, Art has these RTs. They're up and running as part of the system. Now, only RTs can be done this way, but it allows us to update the RT, the transceiver, remotely without having to plug USB into the front. That's an option, but if the system is up and running, we can push out firmware over the network. And so I was in an opera house where they had 11 transceivers. They were all mounted around the facility in the ceiling. And I was able to upgrade all of the transceivers without having to get on a ladder, which is good because I don't like ladders.
Yeah, and I'll add to that, if you do have multiple transceivers, we only have 2 here, but if you have multiples, it does it in sequence. It'll actually start with the first one, update it, then go to the next one, update it, and so on and so forth until it completes all of the transceivers. But yeah, it's a very convenient way to do it because you don't actually have to go to the physical hardware to do any updates. And as Gary mentioned, that is just for that's just for the transceivers. You can't do that with any of the other devices that are out there currently. So that's how you update your firmware. Very easy to do. We put it all in the one package, and that is actually very convenient to do it that way. Okay, so let's jump back to our applications real quick. And I'm going to hand it back over to Mark. I'm going to go off camera, and he's going to talk about an industrial application.
Yeah, hey everyone, I'm real excited about this one. This is a real application that I've taken and homogenized to protect the innocent. But we have Area 51 over here and Area 52 over here, and there's a door that's separating those 2 units from each other. Now, the scenario is that when that door closes, Area 52 needs to continue to operate autonomously, and Area 51 needs to be able to operate autonomously. And when the doors open, they then want to be able to connect the 2 together so that everyone who's on the wired intercom matrix who's talking into Area 51 via 4-wire can then also talk into Area 52, which is being synced up at the customer's request via our CrewCom devices, our 2 control units. So I'm coming from a existing matrix into the master control unit for Area 51, and then Area 51 is then control units rerouting those conferences internally, like I showed you in the conference assignments on the ports, out via the 2-wire into the secondary control unit for Area 52, which resides outside of the door. So once that one CrewNet connection is disconnected, Area 52 will continue to operate, and Area 51 will continue to operate, minus the secondary control unit. That will go down, as will its associated radio transceiver. So this is a very interesting application that we've brought forth that allows the system to operate during a couple different instances of a industrial application where a door is being used and things need to be isolated from one another. I also took, and what Art's going to discuss shortly, is I took and used even hopping patterns inside of Area 52 and odd hopping patterns in Area 51. That enables me to ensure that if the system ever ran side by side, any potential for a collision is minimized significantly.
So these numbers here, just to be clear, are not hopping patterns. You're just numbering.
A number of radio transceivers that are on the quote for that.
Yeah. Good. And I also want to note that these devices shown are not to scale, just in case you were wondering. They're not actually that small. Just wanted to point that out. Sorry, Mark. All right, time for a quick poll, and then we will jump into the last couple of applications, and then we should be done. So let me do the next poll. And this one is, which other wireless intercom products are you using or are most familiar with? Please select one. So make sure you click on one or two, or not, I'm sorry, select one. So in this case, it's the one you're most familiar with. So we'll see how we sit there. Give a few seconds. It takes a little while for everybody to kind of chime in, but we kind of want to get an idea of what you're familiar with and what's being seen out there in the market. All right, so let's go ahead. I will close the poll and then I'll share the results so you can see. And there's our results. As you can see, Clearcom FreeSpeak, Real Bolero, and then RAD and RTS. So actually got a pretty good mix with systems that you're familiar with. So hopefully you're seeing some of the ways that we're different, some of the ways we're similar to some of these other systems that are out there. And let me go back to the PowerPoint And I'm going to go a couple of more application. This one is a particular broadcast facility, a very large broadcast facility here. And Gary, did you have something you wanted to jump in on?
Oh, I thought you wanted me to do the review on this one.
Yeah, go ahead. Go for it.
So this is a large broadcaster, and as you are familiar with, most large companies don't want to use their name in presentations because they don't want it viewed as an endorsement, although this particular company has well over 350 packs operating in one building. So what we've done is we've taken one of those studios and just shown you how they build out a system. So they have many systems in there. They're using both frequencies. We've coordinated them carefully and adjusted antenna gains and such, so everybody plays nice together. So even though we have the ability to build up 14 transceivers in 900 and another 16 2.4, because of our ability to synchronize, we can have multiple systems operating in the same area. And just like good RF, it just needs a little bit of design. And so what you'll see here is a typical studio with 4 of our control units, the copper hubs, and you'll notice that each transceiver has a direct run back to the copper hub. And that's because they really don't like the daisy chain. If they lose a cable for some reason, they want them to be independent. And they intersperse the hubs too. So if you lose a hub in an area, you still got other coverage. So we have an example of a very large scale facility, and this is one room in that. While we're on this one, to mention to any of our users and our channel partners, we are very happy to work with you directly on design. So if you would like individual one-on-one training for CrewWare, or you have a specific application that you need help with, absolutely contact any of the 3 of us. We'll be very happy to help you out on that.
Hey, Gary, before you hop off, there's one more question that popped up. I'll read it to you. Is there any way you see hopping patterns set on competing systems, not of your own?
No, you'd have to look at that manually because, as Art mentioned, the synchronization port is simply that. It's just a signal for timing. So even though we're connected to the 2 systems, it's just a timing pulse that we're getting off of the system. So you would have to, as we've done, go to both parties, take a look and see what each one is doing, and just adjust the ones that are conflicting. It doesn't affect performance at all, and it's generally not a problem, but there isn't a way to see that remotely.
Yeah, and I'll just mention there, because I'm not sure, since the word competing systems was used, in terms of working with other manufacturer systems, whether it's Bolero or FreeSpeak or RAD or whatever, our 900 meg system, at least, we're in completely different bands, so you shouldn't have to worry. The other systems are either DECT based or VHF, UHF. Unless you're using 2.4, then you do have to consider that. But in 900, at least, you don't have to worry. It's a completely different band.
Yeah, and if you have multiples, they're actually cooperating systems as opposed to competing. Once we synchronize them, everybody's happy. An example of that is we had Dancing with the Stars and America's Got Talent, I think it was, in adjacent studios. So they wanted completely separate systems. They didn't want anybody from one studio controlling anything from another. We synchronized both systems, and we were able to even have a common corridor where both of the production staffs could go without conflicting one another and still maintain communication.
Yeah, and from a personal experience, I've been on one award show where actually FreeSpeak, RAD, and Riedel were all being used, and ours all at the same time. A lot of times in big shows like that, where they're wanting to add more users and they've run out of space, basically, of RF space, they added ours because we're in the 900 meg band and able to add, as many packs as they need within the limits of our system. Okay, let's continue on. Next application is a house of worship application. This is a customer of ours called Grace Church, based out of Maryland Heights, Missouri. And just to give you a little bit about who they are and they actually came to us looking for a solution to essentially replace. I believe they had some older maybe BTRs or so forth. I can't really remember in terms of, but they needed a wireless solution, but they also needed to tie into their existing ClearCom 2-wire system. So basically we came in, did the demo, everything from a range standpoint worked great. From an interfacing standpoint, using the auto nulling and everything worked great. So they ended up going with our solution. But they actually, I'm going to kind of point out a couple of things, because they started out with just a very basic system, and now they're adding on to their system in the process of doing that actually as we speak. But actually, this is just a very basic layout of their facility. They have the main church part of the building, which is kind of the main stage area where the seating area is actually in this area where I'm just showing that. They currently are using 6 packs in this area. And then 1 transceiver, as we've mentioned, 1 transceiver can cover up to 6 packs. They're using 2 volume packs, by the way, and a 2+2 control unit, which gives them 2 wired intercom channels on 2-wire. So they're connecting up through that control unit into their system, and they currently just have 1 transceiver, and they've got 6 users that they're using in this particular area. Now they're wanting to add at least 1 more transceiver in what they call the foundry, which is another worship space in the facility, but it's pretty far away. So they're connecting via fiber from the control unit onto the second port of the control unit via fiber to the foundry, and that will become part of the main system. Now, the reason we're doing that and not 2 separate systems is they do want to have the ability to combine packs if necessary. And actually, the way we did that is we actually created conferences and profiles specific to the foundry, even though it's all part of the same system. In the foundry, it's all going to be wireless only communication. So we just created separate conferences and separate profiles so that those people can just communicate in that area. Then when they have bigger events, they can bring bring this same transceiver over to the main stage, either plug into the daisy chain or plug into the control unit, and now they have the ability to have up to 12 users in that one location.
Just a comment on that. This is another unique attribute to our system. When you combine the ability to give certain people one set of conferences and a different group completely different conferences, and you also have the ability to select where one person can go and have coverage versus another person, you actually can create 2 completely independent systems that are all on 1 control unit. And what that allows you to do is have kind of 1 master operator, but then reconfigure and change the profiles. So as Art said, we can have 2 completely separate operational systems, but it's 1 piece of hardware, or combine it all when necessary when they need more people. That's a fairly unique property for us.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another interesting thing I wanted to bring up that's unique to our system is that we offer a 2x2 control unit and a 4x4 control unit, which you can interspec across the campus and have different amounts of access into the system, as well as a 2-knob and a 4-knob belt pack, and all of that will coexist on the same system, along with 2 different types of bands. You can put 2.4 and 900 on our network, the CrewNet network, and they'll all play well together and operate very, very well together. So there's a lot of unique features that we've been alluding to through the entire presentation, and we have a 2-knob belt pack and a 4-knob belt pack, and we take that for granted, but that's really kind of a big deal. You can save some money and also make the user experience more streamlined and easier in the example of a 2-knob belt pack being used.
Yeah, actually, Mark, that's a great point. So, like, for instance, these guys, if they wanted to add a couple of 4 volume packs, you just add that, pair those to the system. Even though they're using a 2 volume or a 2+2 control unit, you can have 4 volume packs on there. There could be 2 wireless.
As long as you build a profile that supports a 4-knob 900 belt pack.
Right.
Because the profile is the heart of the whole thing.
That's right. The power of the profile. So speaking of that, let me just real quickly show you exactly what we did. This was their original configuration. Very simple. 1 control unit, 1 transceiver. Of course, you could go into the details and see how everything was connected and so forth. And that gave them 6 packs in this main area, the main stage area. And this is actually their profile list here. And one thing you'll find that's actually kind of unique, and it's great for anybody who's doing, whether it's house of worship, a theater, where you may have a lot of volunteers, what they've done is they've actually created multiple profiles, not only for different roles, but also even for different people. So the great thing is, let's say you have one volunteer one weekend and a different volunteer the next weekend, you can just call up their individual named profiles and it'll operate specific to that person. And they'll be able to log into, in this case, the main area, but then in the future, they can go into the other areas if necessary. So anyhow, that's the basic profiles over here. And then over here are your conferences. Very simple. There's basically two main conferences that are being used. A party line, service director, and video director, two different basic conferences, and that's it. Now that can also be expanded, and you'll see we will expand it going forward. So to explain how we did the configuration file for the example I gave just a minute ago, they wanted to add 3 more packs, and those can be used in the Foundry. So we essentially basically added the Foundry transceiver. As you can see here, this is a fiber connection. And then this was the original main transceiver going back to the control unit. And then daisy chained off of that as part of the configuration. We went ahead and built the Atrium Chapel transceiver on there because that's something they do plan on adding into the future, but it'll be ready for when they actually get the hardware. Then in addition, we added a couple of profiles. In this case, all I did was add basically cloned part of the profile functionality is you can clone existing profiles. So I cloned a profile and then just renamed one for the Foundry and one for the Atrium. So now when Mr. Banks goes from the main stage area and he wants to go work in the Foundry, all he has to do is change profiles, and now he's working in the Foundry and he's just communicating with those people in the Foundry. And we created conferences just for the Foundry and then conferences just for the Atrium. So very easy to set up. And then once we set this up, you basically upload it to the control unit, and now you've got a completely different system in the Foundry area once you have your hardware run. And actually, that was the last example that we were going to go through. So if we have any last minute questions, and Gary, if you want to come back on, and Mark, and kind of do, wrap things up, we are pretty much done with what we were going to go through.
Well, we'd like to thank everybody for joining us. I don't see any additional questions. Certainly reach out to us if you have any. We know this was a lot of material to go through. We appreciate all of you staying with us, for the session. And we hope we've answered all of your questions. So,
actually, we did have one come in real quick. That just says secondary versus tertiary. So
okay,
Gary.
So currently the way we have the system set up is you have the master, and the secondary and tertiary is really just for labeling. They really have the same function, but it's just so you can remember what order you have them plugged in, but their operation is the same. All of the secondary and tertiary control units are controlled by the file that's on the master CCF.
Yeah, that's a great point. We didn't really point that out. But when you put together a multi-CU system, the control CCF file lives only on the master. The other control units, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, you basically need to delete any config files that are on those control units. So that's kind of.
We have one more question. It just came in. Does the sync connection need to be connected the entire time the two systems are in use? And yes, the answer is definitely you want to do that. You want to maintain sync. It's actually a good practice to even synchronize two different systems that are in the same area, but at different frequencies. So even though normally you wouldn't worry about a 900 and a 2.4, there are harmonics, and desensing is a real thing. And so it probably doesn't make a massive amount of difference, but as best practice, it's good to synchronize everything if you can.
And I'll add on to that real quick. We didn't really point out, but there on the back of the control unit, there's a sync input. Now it's an input only. And I made this mistake early on when we saw the system, is that you would basically connect up the two sync ports. That's not how it works. You basically take a CrewNet port anywhere on the system and plug that into the sync input. So that allows you to sync two systems actually much more easily, because you don't have to go control unit to control unit. You could come off of the hub. And actually, that's what we did in the NRG example. Was we came off of a fiber hub and actually fed that into the NRG system from the Thursday Night Football system.
Sure, and any connection, including a transceiver output. And I see we just had one more question come in. Is the event log wraparound? If so, how long? The event log just keeps going in a linear fashion. And it's because it's on your PC, it's stored on there. I'm not aware of any limitation in time. As a matter of fact,
limitation of your hard drive, I think. It's just a text file, really.
Because the event log is only going to show something when there's an actual event. So it's not going to eat up your hard drive. It's not just chugging away, constantly looking. When something happens in the system, it then logs it. So unless you're having problems and people are constantly unplugging and replugging things, you really won't have that much data in there.
And speaking of unplugging and replugging, in the event that you do need to do like I did in my industrial example, you can unplug the sync port and have the two systems become separate systems at that point, and then replug it back in, and it should pick back up again and resynchronize again.
Yep.
That's right.
Okay.
All right. I don't see any more.
We're good. All right, everybody. I hope we've answered your questions. If not, feel free to reach out to us. There's a sales@plianttechnologies.com. We'll get to all three of us. But thank you very much for joining.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.
Have a great day.
Bye-bye.